here. Soil health is the root or base of all our gardening success. So I love this class, and I'm sure you will too. Emily's been involved in soil for many more years than she's been with us. So be sure to ask all those hard questions. When you ask a question, we're going to be typing it over here to our Zoom friends. The Zoom people will also be chatting and having conversations that we'll announce to you all. So it's a little weird, but should be able to make that happen. Very good. Any questions before we start? Wait, what time is it? Oh, we're not starting quite yet. We've got 2 more minutes. Yes. Yes. People came in last time.
Fair enough. I thought we started at 5 after.
Oh, it was 5 to 10 now.
Okay, okay. We got a lot to go through tonight, Sarah. Well, we can drag our feet a little. So I am Emily, as she said. So I love getting to be the educator here at Unity Gardens, and I'll have like my 1 year here in March, end of March. And before I was here, I was working at the the Michigan version of the Soil and Water Conservation District. So they call theirs just a conservation district. I was in Cass County, and I got to work with a ton of farmers doing a program called MEAP, which is the Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program. Very long title. But we had a lot of fun, and it was a grant that basically let us go to farmers and do like confidential, just one-on-one consultation type stuff. So they could kind of get some advice and maybe fix some stuff without the state kind of knowing what they're having to fix, and it being a more tense thing for them. And it was really fun. But a lot of what we were doing was trying to get the soil to stay where it's supposed to be and to not erode. And if you're not familiar with erosion, it's when all of this stuff starts washing away. And it's something that you guys will learn a little more about today, but preventing that includes literally just keeping the system of roots in your plants, just like in our photograph here, because as you can see, it's such a network that everything gets held together with all those little fingers, and without them, it can be kind of detrimental. Especially, you know, with heavy rain events or big wind events and things like that. So we'll dig into that. So I'm gonna kick it off. If anybody wants to come in, it's no worries. We'll catch them up. Okay, of course my arrow key doesn't want to work. There we go. So will this hide for me? More. Oh, it seems to have done it anyways. I don't know. Okay, we're trying to fix the Zoom. So what is soil? If you guys haven't had an opportunity to take like a class specifically on soil, it's something where you may think of it as like an inert substance, like a rock, but think of it as something that has a lot of living pieces, parts inside of it. So it's a combination of a lot of different textures, and they're all going to be very, different depending on their characteristics. And the real good stuff that we get to use in the garden that keeps your plants happy is filled with living organisms. So that's a big part of what we want to take away from today. So we're going to be talking about a lot of those living organisms, what their role is, and how you guys can help them out and be more aware of their existence, because it's a whole different world under there. And we really don't have eyes that are able to see that small of an ecosystem, but think of every plant's roots as its own kind of mini ecosystem for these little micro guys. And so there's a little tiny graphic on here. We'll talk a little more on the next slide, I believe, about this, but it's saying that, this is like our pie of what makes up soil. And okay, so just a little background. If you're unfamiliar with your history of America, there was a really hard time in the early 1900s when we started experiencing a lot of issues related to poor farming practices. So people were tilling the land, especially out in the plains states, because it was wide open for planting. And they were planting a lot of wheat, and they were digging pretty deep with those plows. Well, every time that they would dig up that soil, and they would ruin that root system a little more, and eventually it was hard to grow anything there. And then there was a huge drought. The drought of early 1930s, really helped kind of dry it all out even worse, make the situation compounded, and the wind kind of picks it up, carries it off in those giant awful dust storms that we kind of see photos of in history books. And we don't think to ourselves that, you know, the Great Depression was related to soil conservation, but it very much was a huge contributor because we had a lot of displaced farmers. We had a lot of migratory people trying to travel across country to find work because they weren't able to grow anything anymore. And there was a lot of economic hardship that came from that. That it wasn't the only reason we experienced that in America, but it definitely didn't help anything. That's for sure. And we actually have a wonderful system in America of conservation programs and conservation districts state by state. And their main role is to help prevent this type of thing from ever happening again. And a lot of their original founding was based on that principle. Okay, so we want to talk about what we could do in our home garden to avoid that, because if you are a farmer, you may have quite a bit of acres to be thinking about, but even on a small scale, you don't want to lose that topsoil because it's going to have a lot of good stuff in it. And we'll talk more about what that good stuff is, but it's the good black gold, as we call it. The top layer of your soil is only a few inches, maybe to an inch. And it's very important that you keep that, but you can add to it. You can always give it a boost. You can add more on top, but naturally it doesn't form very quickly. It takes hundreds, if not thousands of years for every little teeny millimeter of that to form. So we like to add a lot of organic materials, but this is living material and it has some benefits like adding a bacteria that eats all of the atmospheric nitrogen and creates a plant available version of that. And it's this very long, I mean, we said it's Brady rhizobium, and don't quote me on this, but japonicum is what I would say the second word is. And there's going to be lots of these random Latin words that maybe we don't recognize them by name, but we can know that they are on our team and they are a big part of what you can use in your plant rotations. Because when you're doing a rotation in your garden, you're going to want to change what you plant each season to kind of keep the disease down, and you can add in nutrition. So those little nodules that you see in this photograph here are kind of a hub where those bacteria live, and they take in that atmospheric nitrogen and convert it so that the plant can enjoy it, and it's there kind of to be taken up by the next crop too. So it stays in the soil really well, especially if you terminate it without chemicals and if you terminate it while leaving the material. Like if you're able to either till it in and plant right away, because if you do till it in, a lot of folks have to do that for stuff that doesn't winter kill, where it's like a plant that it lives through the winter somehow. You're going to have to do something to kill it so that your plants can grow. So you can crop it down, like crimp it down. Some people put a board and they kind of like push all of it and break it and plant into that. So it's like a mulch. Some people will solarize it and put a tarp down over top and try and kill it off that way. You can use old pond liner. You can use, there's like the billboards that they give you the vinyl to. I've seen people use old silage tarps, a blue tarp, whatever works for you. But yeah, so this is just a nice tool to use as a soil food that is natural, keeps you from having to apply any sort of liquid nitrogen fertilizer, at least in a large quantity, because they're relatively effective. That's why a farmer is usually using soybeans and corn in rotation. Okay, so if you aren't familiar, the bumblebee is a ground nester. She's a sole queen survivor every year, and she lays underground dormant for the winter season. So even though we talk a lot about keeping all of our soil covered and planted, keep in mind there are some critters that do really like if you leave a little bit of bare soil in like in between your plants and things. There's a lot of ground nesting native bees, a ton of them. And we know that they thrive in healthy soil. So we want to protect the quality. Okay, we're getting into the bread and butter now, guys. So on your table, there's a lot of different textures of soil and some things that are turning themselves into soil, but they're not quite there yet. And this is kind of the average makeup of the soils we'll find in the US in our area, but each type of soil is going to have a different percentage here. So this is like one size does not exactly fit all. But you can definitely guarantee that if you were to send in your soil sample, they're gonna tell you a small number percentage of organic matter, somewhere between 2 and 5 is usually. 5 is like, you get an A+ if you have 5 already in your yard, but it takes a long time to add that and to raise that number up. And then there's also, you know, air, and air is gonna be something where if you're not having air in that system, it's what's compacted. So if you have ever experienced, like, you drive on your lawn and then that grass doesn't grow quite right anymore in that track from your heavy vehicle, that's because that area is compacted, meaning that the air pockets are just gone. So you can aerate soil with earthworms. They are our natural aeration. And then some people use things like a broad fork in organic farming. There's like a tool, basically you step on it, it looks like a pitchfork, or a pitchfork maybe, but that one's like 2 poles, you step on it and kind of rock it back and forth, and just kind of breaks things up. Okay, and water, we want it to have some water holding capacity. So you're gonna hear me talk about that. That's pretty much where if it has too much water holding capacity, it's gonna be soaking wet and saturated and maybe a little bit too wet. If it has very poor water holding capacity, it's probably sand. So if you look on the table, you should have a cup of sand. You can, if you haven't familiarized yourself with it in a minute, it's a very coarse texture. And then it goes from that all the way down to like the finest texture, which I think the finest texture I have out right now is vermiculite, which is worm passings. But it has a very similar feel to clay. I don't currently have clay available for us, but when the weather is nice, we might revisit this and we can maybe go find some cool holes to dig in the ground. So if you are a nerd like me, these are the soil orders. There's a lot of science and fancy handbooks that are from the Geological Service that include all of the information about these. But I would just let you know, if you end up researching your home property and you see this word here, crystal, that is a good sign that that is a wetland area or has been a wetland area that's maybe dried out. And this big, beautiful triangle is a percent of each texture, because each soil is going to have some of those 3 textures. And it, you know, you could definitely say one thing is pure sand or one thing is pure clay, but when you go outside, you're probably going to find a mix of those things. And so if you look in our, you know, we have one here that has a mulch that's decomposing that shows a lot of different particle sizes, and it's been decomposing on its own, so it's kind of a compost mix with wood mulch. But honestly, it looks like I would probably use that in a mix, honestly. Not too bad. Pretty soon it would be turning into this is what we start our season, and you see these little white pearls in here. So that's pearlites, and that is also for aeration. That's another thing you can be adding. If you have a little raised bed, especially, that's awesome for being able to put whatever you need to grow in there if you have poor soils at home. So any combination of these, if you have a opportunity at home to take some soil. Now, my mix didn't end up separating super nice because I had pretty much pure vermiculite instead of a sandy mix. When you do this, you can mix, it doesn't really matter your amounts. I do about a cup of soil and I just fill it with water and I shake it up really good and I set it aside and leave it alone. So at first, within a couple minutes, you'll see most of the sand fall to the bottom. And then you can kind of see that line usually. And then after that, you're going to get your silt to fall, which I would give it overnight to see the full effect, because sometimes it can be rather cloudy. But once it's fully cleared at the top, you'll notice that you'll see kind of some distinct lines. And if you're a nerd like us, sometimes you want to know specific things, and you could take that and just kind of do a little math equation. So you're going to measure it, and then you're going to measure each section. And so that's like a fraction. So it's like, 5 millimeters out of a total of 20 millimeters. So, it's 5/20ths of that, which is a percent, which is 20, what is that? 25%, thank you, 25. And then you have 25% sand. Does that make any sense? I know that's like a lot of math. I hate math actually, but if you're somebody who just likes to know more, I would take your soil at home you're working with and try and ball it up in your hand. And that's gonna tell you a lot. If it sticks together, it has some play. If it falls apart completely, it probably has a lot of sand going on and it probably doesn't have the ability to hold water as well. So because sand is such a big particle to where we can see individual grains of it with our eyeballs, sometimes they're pretty big, so that it goes up to 2 millimeter diameter. There is a grittiness to it, and it's great for, like I said, for aeration and drainage. But you're mostly gonna find it with like little tiny bits of quartz, and it's little small rocks that have been ground up over time. And then silt is kind of a halfway point between that clay and that sand particle. And that's gonna be very similar to that vermiculite that is in one of these cups here, that it's Dirty Bill's vermiculite, which if I'm not familiar, that's one of the passings. And you could have one, I'm gonna take a look at that. You want to feel them, wash your hands if you are worried about that. There's plenty of things. We have a really good, what am I trying to say? There's a campsite where I grew up that is always dry, and it's underneath a sandstone rock shelter area. And that's probably the most pure silty area I've ever been. And it's because you can tell mostly when it's dry by how floury and powdery it feels in your hand, but it'll still have some grit to it, and it'll still hold some water and have that like ability to fall apart. If that makes any sense, because you've all maybe played with clay before. Clay is exactly what we use for pottery is from the ground. I mean, it's very smooth. It's got an extremely small particle to it. And that's why it's like a fine, fine powder, almost like a baby powder in your hands, when it is like a face mask that you might buy as a lady, or something like that powdered. But most of the time we'll see it with its moisture included, so that it's like a brick of clay. Or you might see it at a creek bank, or something like that. You'll notice it more when the weather is poor, because it'll be slippery is something that is a product of it having such small diameter. It holds the water and it keeps it, and it doesn't drain very well. And that has, some benefit, but it is definitely difficult for gardening in, and it's definitely not something you want to break up if it is wet. Cultivating it when it's wet, it's going to clump up, and it will also compact really badly. So we want to avoid messing with our soil that's very clay heavy if it's wet. And down south, you'll experience a lot more clay than we get here. We're in kind of the Great Lakes, like right by the beach area, I guess you could say. So there is definitely a good balance for us between the sand and the clay. This has kind of got some highlighted terminology on here, and I'll just say that the nutrition that your plants are craving and needing is going to come from some micronutrients in the soil that are, a mixture of different things going on with different bacteria, pretty much. When that happens, there's certain particles that have almost like a magnet for that sort of nutrition, those nutrients, and that is what is being referred to with the cation exchange capacity. And so when your soil has a high cation exchange capacity, it means that it's very negatively charged, and it can attract, almost like when you're very staticky, like you rub a balloon all over you. It's like that. They're very staticky to those nutrients, is the best way I can put it. And they are kind of acting as a way to hold on to that. Doesn't mean they're available though. So the healthier your soil is, the more it's working in your favor, and it can release those things back to you. So yeah. It's also formed through chemical weathering of silicates. So it's usually very silicate heavy instead of quartz heavy. The quartz is what you'll feel more grit. Now this is kind of a science nerd slide, but we love to know what's under the soil surface. And if you are growing things, you're growing them up here in the O horizon in your first couple of inches. And that took a while to form. And it's a mixture of things that fell on the floor of maybe a forest or your yard, a leaf litter, your old grass that you mowed and it's laid out. Those things break down and they become the top layer of soil. When it's kind of in that halfway mark, it looks very much like our mulch in your cup. And when it's looking like this out in the wild, we call it humus. And a lot of times the humus is where a lot of insect eggs are hiding and other things. Get some water here real quick, sorry. As I spill it. Okay, so underneath that, you're gonna be kind of going down and you're gonna be like going further back in time. So as you go down into the ground, you're thinking, you know, millions and millions of years ago was when that bedrock was formed. And it's slowly kind of breaking down and becoming smaller particles as you go up that horizon chain. And then at the very top is where you'll see like the brand new stuff. So keeping that in mind, have any of you ever had a project done there? Someone had did excavation. Like, did you ever have somebody come excavate at your house before? Okay, so if not everybody's experienced this, so here's some food for thought. If it didn't happen to you, it's something that has happened and it's good to be aware. That little layer of topsoil, if you ever have like a foundation dug or a septic system dug, or there just are a million times when this could happen, even the city like helping you fix a water line or something. If they don't know, it'd be nice to politely remind them to set aside that topsoil in a separate pile, or, you know, help them do that, because you're gonna want to not have it mixed in to the mineral soil that is down here in these subsoil layers. So anything that's like subsoil, it's subpar. It's not gonna grow your grass very well. It's not gonna grow your garden very well either. So when you are experiencing that, you'll wanna put everything back and then put that topsoil on the very top and then plant into that. Because if not, I've literally experienced this through family. Your whole yard will be a gravel pit with a lot of mineral soil and sand, and you're gonna have to buy or source from the city, because the city offers free compost. You can source something to put on top to fix your problem, but you may be sitting out there with a bunch of different lawn chemicals thinking, I put nitrogen on it, I put all this on it. That's not gonna help you because you have no living tissue, there's no microorganisms, there's nothing working in your favor that's alive in that mineral soil. It's mostly like rock, and the lower up to the top you're getting, the more it's got your microorganisms. So yeah, that's a good thing to think about when you're doing projects. Yeah. What's that? Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, so if you put that compost down, just try and plant it right when you do it, so that since it's a hill, you don't want it to wash out on you. And sometimes when people plant like grass on a hill, I would put maybe like straw, or you could they make like a blanket specifically for that. Because anywhere, this is something to think about, anywhere you have a slope, that the heavier your slope, so the more your hill goes up and hurts your knees, the more likely that soil will erode if it is not got plant roots in it. And that is so important to remember if you're doing your initial planting of things and you get all of it loosened up just to plant it, you may need to protect it because you may get a major rain event, and then all that newly loosened soil from your planting could lead to a little bit of a washout. So just watch the weather. Yeah. Oh my goodness, yes, thank you. I sometimes always need a reminder. Our comment was that someone did indeed put mineral soil from a project on their hill, and it didn't grow very well. And they were asking if they could just put compost down on top of that to help with grass. And that's where we're at. So yeah, if you do decide to go ahead and repair an area like that, just like I said, keep in mind any slopes you might want to, because you'd hate to put all that effort in and then have it wash away the next time you're out. Okay. This is a tool that if you're interested in finding out what exact soil type is supposedly on your property, the US Geological Survey, they have put their work together and they have created these GIS maps, which are fancy maps that take a lot of space on your computer. But if you have no access to a computer, the library computer would be able to get you on here. And I'll be real, this is an older website, so it's not that scary it's not like it's a big file or something. You just go right to their website. It's linked here. You can use their app. The tricky part is, when you type in your address, it'll say AOI, that stands for area of interest. And so your area of interest, you get to draw the outline, but you're gonna wanna zoom in, because it's gonna show you the whole world pretty much. Most of them, their files are from America though. And they have a little box and you can type in your address. I usually avoid using like commas, but I'll just put my number and my street and my city. And it will usually get you really close to your home. And you can basically use the toggle tools and things that I have a handout, or not a handout, but a QR code at the end for a how-to. So that you guys can kind of check that out. And again, we're trying to get all these resources together for y'all. So I appreciate that. This is kind of showing you 3 different types of soil. And on here, it's gonna say things like urban land, Grady complex, 0 to 1% slopes. What the heck does that mean? Now, this is like a shorthand where if you were doing this every day, like I used to do for work, you may recognize them by the letter more. And the letter is what's gonna be on the map. And that letter will be the same. It's a combination of letters, obviously, but it'll be the same for that soil type every time it shows up on these maps, if that makes sense. So that's why they all have weird number letter codes next to them, but that'll show you the percent of the area of the map that is that supposedly. And I say check on the ground always, even with wetland maps and stuff, it's always good to double check, but it'll give you that slope. So if you are looking at this and it said like at the bottom here, so we've got our Coloma complex, and the complex is their way of saying it's the soil type. So complex is like saying type. And your Coloma, this one is slightly different. There's another type of this that's just the 0 to 1. It's basically saying it's a slopey hill. So the higher that number, the steeper the hill, the higher the erosion risk. And you can use your eyeballs to determine that in real life, which is amazing. But it is just, it's always fun to learn more. And there's a lot of things that website can tell you if you plan to do like a construction project, or if you were curious more about farming on land that you own, things like that. So what the heck's going on under the roots and under our plants? There's a beautiful thing called the mycorrhizal system, and it's basically mushroom city. And if you're not familiar, the top part of the mushroom that we get to enjoy with like steak and, you know, the thing that we're used to seeing and calling mushroom, that is the fruiting body of the mushroom. So basically consider that like the apple, and then the root system underneath is so vast and so, you know, absolutely outweighs it in mass, that it's more like the tree itself than the apple, if that makes any sense. We've got a lot of really tiny roots too that are more like fine hairs, and when they get that small, they become hyphae. But what happens is those fungi kind of intertwine with our plants. All different types of plants have all different kinds of relationships with these different underground mycorrhizal networks. And what they do is they feed each other, they work as a team kind of, and they have benefits for each other. Because keep in mind, your fungi are a completely separate group from your plants. They are not in the same phylum scientifically. And what they do is decompose things. They break things down and they clean up the forest. So, or in nature in general, anywhere that they're working, not just the forest, but in your garden too, they're gonna help you break stuff down, and they're great decomposers and your composting friend. Okay, so yeah, and what's mycelium? Well, that is the actual roots that are connecting everything together, and they transfer things back and forth, like a little friendship swap. When one is down, they're going to kind of work together to make sure that the whole system has what it needs. And there's a lot of benefit to that with trees, especially because if one tree falls, there's a gap, and then the trees next to it are more likely to be susceptible to storm damage and wind. So if they work all together, they're all helping each other stay more rooted in the ground. And it kind of, there's a lot of other plants that have their own reasoning for this, but evolution kind of teaches them that as a group, as a forest, they're stronger and they're more able to deal with drought, disease, etc. So they move water, nitrogen, and carbon especially. So just food for thought, that 1 cubic inch, so an inch is about 2 notches down on your finger on average, 1 inch by 1 inch. by 1 inch is about 8 miles of these tiny fibers in healthy soil, which is pretty cool. And for thinking about what that visually might look like, from my reading, it's very similar to the finger-like little fuzzies that you will see forming on fruit as they're trying to decompose. And I'm gonna check our time because I know we have a lot to cover. Okay, we're halfway through, yay. And what these guys do is they're kind of like the little fingers that are looking for food, and they end up kind of helping be the guide that leads to the decomposing thing that we're trying to break down, because it's sort of the brain, if that makes any sense. It's gonna go through the soil system and look for things that it can break down and use those hyphae as like a little mouth to kind of find its food. And what is a rhizosphere? That is what I was kind of referencing when we say there's a little ecosystem going on in the plant root area. So as you see, we've got a teeny tiny little square at the bottom of our plant. And if you zoom in really hard, you'll see these bacterial nodes, which is, you know, thinking back to that first slide, which I can show us again, those nodes are almost visible in some plants, especially soybeans, but there's a lot of ones that aren't just nitrates, and there's a lot of things that basically form a little hub where they can convert the nutrients from our ground to a plant available version of that. And in that process, you're basically getting your plant fed. Like it's hard to explain. I definitely appreciate visuals like this because you can see how this little guy here is supposed to represent the little hyphae, the little fungus hairs that are coming in, and it's actually in itself kind of inserting into the plant roots. So there is a whole network where they're actually connecting, and that is how they're able to provide those nutrients. So there's other stuff hanging out down there too. There's a lot of bacteria, protozoa, and a lot of little guys that are entomologists may tell you a lot more about than me. And we're gonna have some friends come from Wild Ones later in the season, and they're gonna give us a lot of great info about how to be better stewards for our in-ground nesting insects and pollinators. So this is a graphic you guys have, and I just thought it was a really nice thing put together. It came from my favorite resource that I've been using, which is the Farming with Soil Life Handbook. And the long title is Handbook for Supporting Soil Invertebrates and Soil Health on Farms. This is a project that was basically funded by SARE, which is the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, I believe. Yeah, and then there's basically the authors were the Xerces Society. And the Xerces Society, it's named after a butterfly, so it's Xerces, and I do have a reference page at the end of our slideshow. That is an insects research group that basically is wonderful resources for anybody that wants to keep little critters alive and well in this world. So it's amazing for them to release a soil health book, in my opinion, because the focus is definitely on keeping those microorganisms happy. And there's a QR code to the PDF version of this in a reference slide at the end. And I'll make sure to leave that up for everybody. So these guys, some of them you need a microscope to see, some of them you don't, but they're definitely our team players. We have a lot of earthworms that end up making tunnels. We've got nematodes, which are kind of guys like this. Some of these I know, some of them I don't. There's bacteria, which are guys like this, and our fungi, obviously. Now, algae are found more in wet soil types, so your hydrosols more, but they can lay dormant at times too. So like intermittent wetlands are wetlands that aren't always wet. And so you might end up finding more interesting creatures in those areas. So this is a graphic that came from a research paper that I had on my notes from my science class in college relating to soils. And basically it's telling you when you get down on the bottom of your pyramid, there's a ton of these guys in every little bit of soil. There's so many versus how many of, you know, each of these is less, but it's how many fit in, what is it? 10.7 square feet, because it's 1 square meter. So in 1 square meter, they have basically kind of figured out how many of those creatures you may find, and those numbers are astronomical. But in my mind, it's crazy how many bacteria can fit into such a small space, and how we can't see them even when they're that concentrated, because they're so small. And there's a lot of really good illustrations out there that show different pieces of the plant organism life. But really, if you just take away that it's alive, it needs to be fed, and it'll help feed you and it'll help feed your plants. That's kind of the bare bones of what we want you to take away from today. And that the deeper you dig, the less alive that soil is going to be. So if you're making big tillage operations with your rototiller, you may be adding a lot of that mineral soil up to the surface. And you may also be adding a lot of weed seeds if you're tilling in things like your lawn to make a brand new garden. So keep that in mind. In our practice, we usually smother. So we'll smother out any plants or any grass or anything like that with cardboard, newspaper, and add a bunch of mulch on top of that. And that mulch is a very important tool for keeping soil in place. So even if we do have a pathway in between things, we want to try and mulch those spaces to not have bare soil. And you can use any natural material. In my opinion, there's a lot of choices for mulch. A lot of people use grass clippings. We use the mulch is free to us from the city. So that's obviously a great choice for everybody in the city of South Bend and abroad to come here. I think it's for all residents of St. Joe, right? Or is it city only? It'd be worth a 311 call because
when they put it outside like there, where you just go pick up anything. Todd, you went and got some from with the truck there. Yes. Yeah.
Sarah's saying that for anybody that wants to come from the St. Joe area, that there's a cubby outside their fence that has it free access. I doubt they're gonna ask too many questions, I'll be real. They just want to help people get what they need.
These are checking their operating hours, but you can go at any time and just pull up.
Yeah. If you need to reach out to them to kind of ask questions, it is a 311 call, but you're gonna ask for organic resources. And they have a compost option available too that we've had great success growing our gardens with. Some people have feelings about it because there used to be a lot more waste in it, and there used to be a lot, of worry about tannins from things like walnut. But I haven't experienced, and Katie hasn't experienced anything abstract from the city's compost. 10 out of 10, Katie says. So we're gonna chat a little about soil testing, because if you haven't tested your soil before, especially if you're somebody who likes to fertilize, I'd recommend doing a test first. Trouble is, if you're blanket fertilizing and you don't really know exactly what you need, you could be applying too much of something that you didn't even need to apply. You didn't even need to buy it. And some of that stuff can be expensive, and some of it can be a little bit hazardous. So if you are using natural materials like composted manure, let's say, I used to work with farmers up in Michigan who had properties that were originally hog farms, like generational hog farms, where the hogs were outside. And that manure is so rich in phosphorus that a lot of those fields were absolutely too high in phosphorus. And those guys, the way it works is if they have pigs in a building, they're gonna have the manure have to be spread on a field. And that is how that becomes, safe to use and safe to be taken up by plants. And it has a purpose then. It's not just gonna go in water or something like that. We want it to go where the plants are. Is there a question?
Yes, I know.
Oh, yeah.
So I know phosphorus has been, like you said, maybe positive of water issues, et cetera. So now they have a lot of fertilizers you can get at different stores that are phosphorus free. And tell me about those numbers.
I'm definitely gonna get in there for you. So just to finish the first thought, the idea is that it sticks around. So you're gonna find out that there's certain nutrients that are very quick and they move through the soil really quickly, and that's usually nitrogen, because you can't even in a regular soil test see the number for nitrogen, because they won't give it to you unless you're getting a plant tissue test done, simply because it's just evaporates as it's mailing it. You're mailing soil usually in a bag. About a sandwich baggy's worth is enough for a soil test. We recommend taking a lot of different samples from all over the area and then mixing them together. And they're gonna tell you all these micronutrients, and the three numbers that Sarah's referencing are the three numbers you'll see, like 10, 10, 10, or you'll see like, you know, 666. It's all the numbers with dashes in between them that are on fertilizer bags. Those are your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. So your nitrogen is the first number, and that is usually something that, especially when you're doing it early in spring, it's never gonna hurt to add a little, but I would use like an organic. Here we use organic. We'll use like fish emulsion or grass or what have you. A legume. Did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to make a
Sure.
comment, when you talk about organic resources,
Mm-hmm.
and we got trailer loads from there and dumped them in our beds. We had cardboard and other things too,
Yeah.
but the crops just produce wonderfully.
Oh, that's great.
Huge.
So we have someone that, one of our satellite gardeners raving about the quality of the compost from the city because they received truckloads of it, and had great results. So thank you.
So the comment is comparing that with, chemical fertilizers,
Mhm.
like you're talking
Mhm.
about. And I know there are huge advantages with composted soil.
Yeah.
For structure and water.
Yeah, you're teaching your soil to feed itself. And so that's what these bacteria are doing. They're basically kind of working as kind of like your gut bacteria works. It's helping break down what you do apply, whether that's as compost or you're going to want to add some sort of organic matter in the off season. Right now, we're mulching the heck out of our garden to add lots of, you know, good stuff to break down. Excuse me. We also have the thought that if you're applying stuff like manure, because it's organic, and because it's a waste product that we want to use up, it's great to test first, just in case. Do you have a question?
Preference for manure, someone
Yeah.
offered me horse manure,
Mhm.
but another friend said you only want cow manure.
I would say aged.
Egg.
Aged is your preference, because if it's hot, which is what we mean when we say hot, we mean it's too strong and it will burn your plants. And so that's a farmer will tell you that that manure is still hot because it's still stinky and it hasn't been composted. So composting is what we're gonna go over next week, and I'll briefly kind of mention what that process does. But what you need to kind of realize is the heat is what kind of kills some of the bacteria in E. coli mess sort of way, I should say, because we want some of that bacteria to stay alive, obviously. We're really hoping for living organisms. But there are certain things in manure that are just really rich when you first get it, that it needs to sit for a while. And so with horse, I believe they recommend 3 years. Chicken is, I believe, pretty high in ammonium. And chicken litter in general, like, I don't know how they would isolate the chicken stuff, but it all comes out of the same place. They have a lot of people who will capture that stuff and create like a fertilizer that they bag, but it's always aged. So yeah, that's my preference, is usually whatever I'm gonna use, I can send it to the same place I get a soil test, and it'll actually give you the same information. So it'll tell you that's really high in phosphorus. It'll tell, and pig is high in phosphorus. That's just something to know. I had mostly clients at that time that they raised pigs, so we're trying to figure out what to do because that's what we're dealing with. But if you can avoid over applying that, they say if you get the soil test and it says 130 parts per million, and then I don't know what it stands for, but Bray is the type of soil test I'm referring to. It's a Bray phosphorus test. It will be starting to leach through to the groundwater after 130 parts per million. We're starting to risk groundwater safety, which is important if you drink from a well. Or if your neighbor or anybody in your community drinks from a well, because it's all one big underground connected thing. And also, just considering having an isolated test done and any problem spots. If you are having a problem spot, you can take a sample of just that area and have that sent, and it can give you some information as well. Do you have a question, Sarah?
6 months about the right time frame, for aging, because I know like.
I think it depends. Some people do it multi-year, and then other people will hot compost it, meaning they pay close attention to if it gets to a certain temperature. I don't know the temp offhand. They'll take a long thermometer. I used to give them away, so keep them in my back of my car as the thermometer lady, and it would get poop on it. So I had a tube that would go in. And so it's 30 some inches. If you put it down in the middle, and it'll go a couple hundred degrees, just like regular hot composting. And that process speeds up the breakdown.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're more careful about it, I think you can shorten that time significantly. But if you're somebody that maybe, you know, you're just going to a buddy's house and he's just got a big pile in the back, just keep in mind, getting a little bit of a test done, it's an extra step, but it could tell you a lot, and it could tell you, okay, if I apply this, I've got all the phosphorus I need, I got all the nitrogen I need, I got everything I need, and I don't need to buy anything. And it's something to add to your repertoire, is the idea of getting a soil test. It's intimidating, but I think when you get the first result back, the hardest part is understanding what they need. So there's always results that you can get that don't have suggestions, but it's nice if you tell like the lab that you're sending it to, which we recommend a lot of different ones that Purdue recommends, and the handout you have should have some resources as well from like A&L Labs. Their website has a great breakdown of how to understand the soil tests, and they have a great customer service thing, like email. I bet they have a phone number too. They're used to dealing with old farmers. A&L Labs, and I think on the form I gave you all, there should be a reference to that. Just double checking. I wanna, mind if I look?
That's the first thing on the.
Yeah, and so my friends on the Zoom, it is, sorry, 1 second, it's a soil analysis, soil testing, and the website is AL Maybe you can put that in the chat for us. Thank you. She's amazing. And shout outs to the Soil and Water Conservation District for putting that little reference guide together. And yeah, so this figure here is from this book. Yeah.
Chat, apparently rabbit manure safe to use almost immediately.
Wow. Okay. So that, and if you did a soil test or a manure test on that, you'd be like, oh yeah, I didn't know that. So it's worth a Google sometimes, guys. And I don't pretend to be the manure expert. Purdue. Yeah. That's awesome though. And I believe that actually, because the way it's so condensed, I don't know. Rabbits are not a type of livestock I've had a lot of experience with, but we actually are the proud like group owners of a really sweet rabbit who gets to live here in the summertime. Marvin, I almost forgot. Marvin is a cutie. And so we're learning how to utilize his manure, and we're going to be doing some livestock classes. So I get to get my feet wet. And I know there's some great rabbit folks from the 4-H that raise them and do the clubs and judging. And I'm going to see if we can't get some good info from those guys, because it pays to know people who are smarter than yourself, right? And this is kind of, in my opinion, a nice takeaway for y'all. This is the 4 things that I would love you to try and keep in mind as you're gardening or farming or whatever you're doing, landscaping, even if you're just trying to get some new lawn figured out. You're going to want to maximize living roots. If something isn't planted there, nature will plant it for you, and it will be probably a weed, or it will wash the soil away from not having anything planted there. And then you're only going to get scrub stuff that is probably also a weed. So then the other one is minimizing disturbance. So that's tillage. And if you can, when you're harvesting your plants, if you can cut them instead of pulling them by the root, unless it's a root vegetable, of course, it is amazing for overwintering a lot of those little bacteria nodules that have been forming on those roots, and they'll break down over time. And it's just a nice way to keep everything intact in winter. So it's not always feasible, and especially if you're going to be planting something directly in there right away, like we do all the time, successional, right away we're trying to get the next thing in. So it just depends on your personal needs and preferences. But I know some microbacteria that would be very happy with you if you left the roots behind. There's also a hope to get some cover on that soil like we're talking about. So maximize cover on your soil. And that, again, legumes are nitrogen fixing plants, and they're things like beans, peas, lentils, peanuts. They're all pretty tasty. So, and even if it's not that though, anything's better than nothing. So having some sort of clover, I think clover is also a legume. But yeah, so we've got biodiversity is the other thought on this. So let's say you do have just a lawn that you're thinking about with this for your soil health. try and find it in yourself to be comfortable with at least like 3 or 4 kind of grasses or kinds of plants that are not as disturbed, if that makes sense. So we have clovers. They look great in lawns. They're short, they're soft. They also have flowers, so that makes them great for our pollinators. We have the classic violets. They're a native technically, which I always thought they were European. So I was really stoked to find out they're a native. They are great ground cover. They don't need much mowing. And I mean, unless you're having a kid playing soccer in your lawn every day, you probably don't need a really strong turf grass. You could kind of add in some of those mixes, or just learning to be more comfortable if you see them arrive in your yard, or dandelions or another. And we understand in the garden bed where you're growing things, you're gonna wanna not think that way as much, because that plant is taking the food from the soil that your plant wants. And the reason some of those plants are considered weeds is because they're so good at taking the nutrients instead of your plants. And so we don't think of weeds as like, it's an unwanted. Some of them are considered invasive, depending on what they are. And some of them are just very hardy, and they want to take over, and they want to steal all the water and steal all the riches from your plants. And that's not going to help you get to tomatoes and zucchinis at the end of the season, which is the main goal. So these are 2 QR codes that I'm going to be leaving up here for a minute for you guys. One of them is to the PDF version of this book, and it's a great way to get it. But if for some reason you have trouble finding it, write down the name of it and give it a Google. It's right on the SARE website. I'm sure it's right on the Xerces website too. These guys. And this is like where you can go to just dig in for more references. There's a ton of great stuff on those websites relating to like insect habitat for the Xerces guys. These guys are definitely bugs. They're the bug guys. These guys are sustainable ag. So anything big or small that you can think of for, you know, even urban ag is in the spotlight right now. So there's some great resources for urban ag too, which is what we do. And then your classic NRCS. If you've never worked with them, they are mostly working with farmer and landowner guys out there, but they will put fields into pollinator plantings. They'll kind of give payments to farmers to do like practices that are better for the land. They'll pay for your cover crop seeds if you apply with them, if you have a lot of acreage. And their role is to kind of make resources that are backed by science, that help people kind of know that they're doing the best they can in the ag world. So they're pretty cool. If you wanted to use that soil website to make a map of your home soil, this is a how-to guide that they created. And it's a really nice step-by-step, and going online, there's YouTube videos as well that can walk you right through it with somebody talking to you. And so that's a helpful way to go about it, because you know you can see them doing it. And then this book here in the middle, it's my favorite book. I was assigned that in my soils class in college, and it is The Ground Beneath Us. The long title is From the Oldest Cities to the Last Wilderness, What Dirt Tells Us About Who We Are. It's by Paul Bogard. Don't bogard the cheese. But there's lots of chapters in this book, each one individually telling the story of a different location, a different place in history, and things that are kind of hidden in the soil that have been lost over time. And it's very interesting. It has a lot of facts, but a lot of story quality to it. So if you're somebody that is audiobook lover like me, there isn't an audiobook to it, unfortunately, that I've found so far. But definitely check that one out. Okay, and then I'm gonna see if we have more slides on here. Yeah, so I'll leave that other one up, but just so you guys are aware, I have a paper form here. It's just a little feedback form. It helps us to kind of get record of how much you guys enjoy the class and any changes that we can make to make it better for you guys. And so we're gonna pass those out with some pens. And this is the QR code version if you're a digital person, because that's the same paper as that. And I'll take it back there because I know that it's great to be able to, if you need help getting a QR code up, I can help you do that too. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Going back to the cover shop.
Yes.
I was interested in getting into that, but I'm having a hard time finding what the
Okay. Yeah.
Specific to Indiana, like, you know, this is like spring, summer, fall.
So are you saying you're trying to get into it as in just learning more information to do it, or did? Oh, okay, so are you thinking about applying it in your own yard on your own dime?
Yes, it's too small for him.
That's exactly what I was about to say. So if you're a small landowner, unfortunately, anything under like, I don't want to say maybe even 5 acres, sometimes they kind of like shrug their shoulders. But from what I'm hearing, they're being a little better about that with the urban ag efforts. So if you are a city farm gardener and you're doing it for a business, I know that that's the thing they require is you have to go through the farm service agency and make yourself a farm profile, I guess. And so that's definitely for someone that's getting really serious in that, I guess you start kind of creeping into the ag world. Yeah, exactly what.
No, probably not.
I think that's great. So that's a cover crop guide. And the person that just asked the question was just talking about applying cover crops, in case I didn't say that to our Zoom chat friends. We have a little guidebook from Purdue that shows a lot of different varieties. And it's realistically not a one size fits all. People do mixes now. So there's a lot of research out there about people who will mix a bunch of seeds that are all different benefits to their land, and they prefer that diversity because then you get a diverse amount of bacteria. So thinking about it that way, in the wild, you're not gonna see just one type of grass ever, really. So if you're out in a field and you see a bunch of different seed head types and a bunch of different flower head types, thinking about how underground, that's gonna be an equal amount of diversity in those thousands of
Yeah.
millions of bacteria and mushrooms, that are underground. So yeah, diversity leads to more variety, which means more available nutrients for you and your plants. And think of it this way, when it's feeding your plant, those nutrients end up in the food that then feeds you. So you are feeding yourself better if you're feeding your soil better, because it will be taken up by that plant.
Phosphates in the soil.
Mhm. If you
What
have
kind
them,
of effect and how long will those last?
they last a long time. They say that like working on your bacteria like this and like thinking about adding living stuff, it does make it more available. So what's troublesome about phosphorus is it gets tied up. And I think that I'm probably not the most like in-depth person to go in depth on this, the most qualified, but there's different types of cover crops that can help take it up better. And I think ryegrass is considered one of them, and I wanna say
Kill it
so.
Back down.
You'd have to remove it, that's the thing. And so it's something where if you grow something to take out a nutrient, if you were to cut it all up and put it right back in the soil, the nutrient goes back into the soil, which sometimes is awesome. But sometimes if you're trying to remove something, it's not as fun. So, and there's also a thought that sunflowers take up some stuff.
I heard something.
Sunflowers take up certain toxins, but there's not a lot of research about the phosphorus being taken up. Yeah, the heavy metals. Yeah, it is wild, and it's food for thought with the brassicas too, because if it's taking up heavy metals and then you're wanting to eat your broccoli, which brassicas are the family of broccoli, cabbage, anything that was once a mustard, once upon a time, they all come from the mustard family. But there's a whole lot of things to consider when you do want to start a garden. And if you do have questionable soil, or you do end up with a soil test that's kind of a frowny face, raised beds. Raised beds are awesome. They can grow stuff anywhere above that soil level. So have you had a high test, sir?
No, I was just wondering if that would show up on a test.
I think MSU Extension from Michigan State University has been working on certain like different test trials to figure out how to deal with some of that, because out in the Lake Erie Basin, they had such a bad, it's called an algal bloom. It's basically when there's phosphorus that's so heavy in the soil, it runs into the lake in the rain, and the rain runoff kind of creates this like green algae that just, it kills everything off. It smothers the aquatic life. So yeah, it's sad. And we are trying to avoid that. I doubt our little farm gardens are gonna be the cause, but it's good to be aware of what to look for.
Well, trying to grow organic, I know it's a certain amount of time.
It is, especially if you're trying to certify organic.
Right.
Yeah, we don't certify.
This tool in the chat, But if you are very interested in cover crops, finding out what you do for fresh soil, we're not planting there. MidwestCoverCrops.org.
Yes. Thank
Cover
you.
crop selection tools, and it's really fun and pretty, so.
Amazing. Thank you, Katie.
Gorgeous stuff.
Yeah, so you guys, we really appreciate you coming, and if you have other questions, just please let us know. I have a lot of fun sharing a lot of this stuff with you guys, because when I was a college student, I had no idea how, many different types of soils there were. They're all a little different everywhere you go, like red clay down south, I have family in Kentucky, gardens, red clay. And, up here, we got a lot of sandy farms up at the beach that grow really nice fruit trees. Because somehow they have this magic ability to be the fruit belt, because they're right on the stand across Lake Michigan along the sidewalk. So it's kind of this little pocket where fruit doesn't really grow. And feel free to follow the soil samples and things in front of you if you'd like to. I think having some context of what you have in your garden is always nice. Thank you all. And I think I'm gonna wrap up the Zoom call. If you have anything else in the chat I'd like to add. Okay, I'm just gonna mute myself. So thank you all for joining on the Zoom, and I'll leave it open for moderators. If anybody would like to leave feedback on our Zoom call as well. Next week, we're gonna be talking about composting. Ironically, Katie just asked me that, but I just put the slide in.